I put very little stock in it myself. Prophecies of doom are never in short supply, especially when winter comes.
Brings to mind the work of Jenny Holstone, the charlatan who claimed descent from the children of the forest.
Don't forget the prophet Lodos, who promised that the drowned god would rise up and destroy Aegon the Conqueror.
Hello, my sweet summer children. I'm back with some juice to get you through the long night. So in my last video, I talked about how White Walkers were made and who the Night King could be, some Nisa vibes. I covered all of that, so you should check that out. But my videos keep getting longer and longer. I have so much stuff that I want to say, it's hard for me to say it in under 10 minutes.
You're a talker.
I know, so let's jump right in. So the White Walkers were made by the Children of the Forest. That's the conclusion that I've reached. And because the Children of the Forest operate with nature magic, earth, water, wind, fire, nature is tricky. It's all about balance. So George R.R. Martin said that he was inspired by a poem by Robert Frost. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. In a Game of Thrones or a Song of Ice and Fire, I think it's important to look at ice and fire as the same. Different, but the same. I've been preaching about ice and fire being the same, each of them just as destructive and just as lovely as the other. But let's reflect on what Jojen said about ice and fire and love and hate and the land being one. And let's go back to the timeline. After the long night and when the Age of Heroes ended, there was a new power rising in Essos, the Valyrians. The Valyrians have a lot in common with White Walkers, although they're like, equal opposites. It's like a parallel contrast, sort of like a weirwood tree and a shade of the evening tree. So before we get into the actual theory, let's look at the similarities between the White Walkers and the Valyrians. First, let's look at geographical similarities. If we look at Essos and Westeros on the map, the White Walkers are from the lands of always winter. And the Valyrians are from the lands of long summer. They don't actually look like this. They don't look like creepy monsters. They are described by our author as being beautiful, dangerous, inhuman, elegant, elf-like people, like the She from Irish folklore. So they aren't hideous. They are blue-eyed, pale people, and they're related to coldness. Then we have another very mysterious race of people called the Valyrians. They are pale, which they shouldn't be pale. They should actually be tan. If you live in a warm climate such as the lands of long summer, you should look at least like the Dornish. But no, these people are fair of skin and hair, and their eyes are shades of purple, lilac, and indigo. So me being the extra person that I am, I looked for real world examples of people having purple eyes and what causes it. And shit, I wound up down some rabbit holes, let me tell you. But let's have a quick science lesson. I'll link this full article below. So over 1,000 years ago, on a dark and quiet moonless night, the people of Egypt were in their households and getting ready for bed when an astonishing bright white light invaded the atmosphere and infiltrated the homesteads of the peaceful Egyptians. Everyone who went outside to see looked up, and instantly their eyes turned purple and their skin became an iridescent white. From that time forward, those who had seen the light were referred to as the spirit people. It seemed at first that no one noticed, but as time went on, the townspeople began to notice and shun those that had been affected. Soon, the spirit people began to lose jobs and were unable to trade in the marketplace. The spirit people band together and left the village and headed to the northern regions of Europe. They disappeared without a trace until 1329. So this is a very fun legend, but scientists believe that it's a gene mutation and they trace it back to the 1300s. Other scientists say it can be caused by a lack of melanin or no melanin. So every human has melanin with the exception of albinos. The more melanin you have, the more pigmentation you have in your complexion. Now, Valyrians being from Valyria or the lands of always summer, they should have melanin. Their complexion should be dark. Everyone else that's not Valyrian who's from the same geographical area look a lot different than the Valyrians. The Giscari, for example. Valyria is more southern than Dorne, but Valyrians have pale skin with silver hair and purple eyes. This is not natural. Not to mention, they can hatch dragons and shit, and ride them and talk to them, and dream of dragons from the future and shit. They're not normal. Imagine this. Imagine we know nothing of the Targaryens or Valyrians or dragons. We aren't normalized to it. And we've only heard about them in legend. And we see one coming through like Daenerys did with the loot train attack on the back of Drogon and shit. Wouldn't we have the same kind of opinion of Valyrians as the Westerosi have of the White Walkers? Okay, so they are similar, but let me break it down. Let me break it all the way down. So in my timeline video, I talked about multiple long nights and the coming of the first men, but have you ever heard of the Great Empire of Dawn? If you haven't, and even if you have, you need to check out LML and Aziz. I'm actually going to link a podcast that LML and Aziz did on the Great Empire of the Dawn and the Ashai episodes as well. So there was this ancient empire in Essos, and it's referred to as the Great Empire of the Dawn. It could have been some kind of long night going on with the Great Empire of the Dawn that caused the first men to come to Westeros in the first place. So let's say that maybe the first men were fleeing from something. And possibly there's this long night type of situation where the Bloodstone Emperor usurped his sister and ushered in the long night, which that's what the history says. The Bloodstone Emperor, the last ruler of the Great Empire of the Dawn, ushered in the long night. Let's say there's a long night in Essos, the one that's ushered in by the Bloodstone Emperor. And this long night happens to be one of fire and blood, complete desolation. But the first men are fleeing this. They want to get away from this. It would make sense, being it was fire, more so dragons, that forced every other people onto the Westeros continent. But this is all speculation, so take it with a grain of salt. Now, the first men are warring on the children for like 2,000 to 4,000 years. Then dark magic happens, and boom, White Walkers come. Ice and desolation. But instead of the fire, this is the long night of ice. And immediately following the long night, we hear of the rise of Valyria. So while Westeros is recovering from the long night, a new power is on the rise. Valyrians. So I think it's LML, but someone had told me that they thought that the Valyrians came from the Great Empire of the Dawn. Like, that's where they came from. And I agree with that. So if you were a Giscari person or anyone that the Valyrians were trying to conquer, and they pulled up on you on a dragon, sowing your fields with sulfur, would you not think they were evil? Would you not think they needed to be stopped? Would you not think they were monsters? Would you not think that this was the end of the world? Would you not think they were fiery White Walkers? Well, they were pretty jacked up, to be honest. The Valyrians, yeah, they were nasty people. They were nasty slavers, and they didn't give a fuck about human life. And then they're finally dealt with, the Doom of Valyria. No one knows the exact cause of the Doom of Valyria, but it was supposedly prophesied by the Moon Singers, and the Moon Singers seem to be a Children of the Forest type of race. So the only dragons and Valyrians that were left after the Doom was the Targaryens that had fled to Dragonstone. So wars between the families broke out, the Dance of Dragons happened, dragons were gone. Now you're probably like, what does this have to do with anything? Well, let me explain. So let's get back to the poem by Robert Frost. So George says he takes things and he turns them up to 11.
And then, of course, I don't make it up, but I take it and I file off the serial numbers, and I turn it up to 11, and I change the color from red to purple, and I have a great incident for the books.
To me, the poem is talking about the destruction of the world once in ice and once in fire. But from what we know of the legends of A Song of Ice and Fire history, the world was remade once in fire during the Great Empire of the Dawn's destruction. Nothing is left but oily black stone. And it's believed that dragons were around before the Valyrians had them, and it was the people of Ashai who taught the Valyrians how to train dragons. But anyway, once in ice during the long night of Westeros, when the children made the White Walkers, that changed Westeros forever. And again in fire with the Valyrians, and the ultimate doom of Valyria that changed Essos forever. And now ice comes again. Sounds like to me he took Robert Frost's poem and turned it up to 11. And the dragons and the Valyrians are the fire, and the White Walkers and the Starks are the ice. And then there's the song. So basically, the seasons in the world of Game of Thrones is set in it's thrown out of whack because of magic, because of the forces of ice and fire, and ultimately they have to be destroyed. They're supernatural and they are upsetting the balance of the world. As long as the dragons and the Valyrians are alive and the White Walkers live, the world will be experiencing these supernatural summers and winters. If everyone from the Night King's army is killed and only one is left standing, only the Night King survives. If you don't kill him, he will find a way to come back. Even if you do kill him, he will find a way to come back as long as dragons are alive. We saw the same thing happen with Daenerys. All of the Targaryens and their dragons dead. Dragons were gone from the world for hundreds of years. White Walkers were rising from the ice, but there was still one ember in the ashes. It is night in your 7 kingdoms now, the Red Woman went on, but soon the sun will rise again. The war continues, Davos Seaworth, and some will soon learn that even an ember in the ashes can still ignite a great blaze. So my conclusion is most of the events that we've been seeing are battles between forces of ice and fire. But even though these battles come and go and they change the world, they will always be until both are gone. You can't destroy the White Walkers without destroying the fire, the Valyrians, the dragons. You can't have one without the other. They are the same. If you destroy what's left of both races of ice and fire, they'll still exist within Jon. So maybe even Jon needs to go. But what do you think? Are the Valyrians and the White Walkers basically the same seed of a different monster? Let me know what you think. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks to everyone that supports me on Patreon. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please click that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and join the Sweet Summer family. Okay, my sweet summer children, have a good day.
Shame.